to see what happens when local school districts try to prevent this process. So the facts of Cooper v. Aaron is that a local school board in Little Rock, Arkansas, had put forth a plan to desegregate the local public high school. So the school board began doing its process. They're like, okay, here are our plans. We're going to desegregate. Here's how we're going to do it. But the governor of Arkansas dispatches the Arkansas National Guard to ensure that no African American students ever enter the school. So the local school board on the ground is trying to do the work that was asked of them in Brown v. Board of Education. And the governor steps in and says no, and sends armed National Guard members to make sure that the high school does not desegregate. Eventually, a court order prevents the National Guard from blocking access to the school. So the district court acts and issues a court order that prevents the National Guard from actually blockading the school. There was eventually so much tension within the area that Eisenhower federalizes the damn National Guard and ensures that the African American students can be admitted to the high school. Literally, he says to one of my favorite parts of this history is Eisenhower says to the governor, "Who do you think the National Guard works for?" It says national in it. It's mine. And in essence takes it over and uses those same troops that were preventing the desegregation efforts to actually protect the desegregation efforts. But then the local school board steps in and sought to postpone the integration. So the same school board that pushed forward the integration now looks at local attitudes and argues that we don't want to integrate right now because in essence, everyone around us is so hostile to the idea of integration that we shouldn't continue lest something bad happen in terms of violence or what have you. But the Supreme Court is in a very interesting place right now. The Supreme Court was out on a limb in Brown v. Board of Education. They didn't know if they had support from the other branches of government. But in this case, in particular, they absolutely know that they have the president on their side. They've seen the president order National Guardsmen to protect the students who were desegregating the schools. So they know they have backing of the president. In essence, they say there's going to be no postponement because the enforcement of this isn't your job, local school district. The hostility is directly traceable to the Arkansas governor and legislature, and they're seeking, the reason why that hostility exists is they're seeking to delay Brown. So the legal position of the school board is really untenable because they're arguing like, oh, look, everything's hostile. We can't integrate right now. Well, the reason it's hostile is because your own elected officials are trying to stop integration. You're trying to stop the implementation of Brown v. Board of Education. So your position of it's too hostile to move forward, well, the reason it's hostile to begin with is because you have really crappy elected leaders. That's not a legal position. That's an electoral problem. And second, and most importantly, the constitutional rights of the African American students should not be sacrificed because the Arkansas governor won't follow legal court orders. The rights of these students is absolutely not dependent on who sits in the Arkansas governor's mansion. So the court states that it is urged that this proposed segregation will promote the public peace by preventing racial conflict. Desirable as this is, this aim cannot be accomplished by laws or ordinance which deny rights created or protected by the federal Constitution. Basically, you can't use violence as a means to deny individuals their constitutional rights, which is what the Supreme Court says in this case, is that just because there may be racial conflict, just because there may be racial violence, that violence in it of itself isn't enough to deny someone their constitutional right. And in this case, it's an entire class of people their constitutional right. But the only reason why the Supreme Court was willing to say that, to be perfectly frank, the only reason why the Supreme Court was willing to take the stand is because they knew that the president had already taken actions um, and shown that he would back up plans to integrate. So the court is very willing to say that the possibility of violence isn't enough to deny someone a constitutional right. They can say that knowing that if there ends up being any form of violence, that the federal government will have their back to stop it. So these very first desegregation efforts were overwhelmingly unpopular, but the court, being signaled to that the president at the time was on board with it, were much more willing to take decisive action. And what we see from the Brown decision and onward is that as the court sees the signals of the other branches of government, Congress and the presidency, being in agreement with them, they're willing to go farther and farther and stronger in the decisions that they issue, because they know that they aren't just issuing decisions that are going to be ignored. Because remember, the court has the power to make decisions. That's the only power that they have. If no one is enforcing those decisions, no one cares about the decisions themselves. So they made a decision in Brown 1 in which they said, this is over. And then they looked to the other two branches of government to see if they were going to have any backing. And with the actions taken by Eisenhower with the National Guard troops in Arkansas, the court knew that the president was going to support them and therefore was even willing to push harder in the decision of this case than they would have been so without the president's willingness to help.